The afternoon sun beat down on Keeler, California with merciless intensity as Helena Crawford stepped off the stagecoach, dust coating her worn traveling dress and the single carpet bag that contained everything she owned in this world. It was 1883, and the small mining town nestled against the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada looked as harsh and unforgiving as the desert landscape surrounding it. But Helena had nowhere else to go after her father's ranch in Arizona had been foreclosed by the bank 3 months prior. She was 22 years old, alone, and down to her last $7. But she held her chin high as she surveyed the dusty main street with its weathered storefronts and sun-bleached wooden sidewalks. The boarding house was easy enough to find, a 2-story structure that had once been painted white but now showed more gray wood than paint. Mrs. Patterson, the proprietor, was a stern-faced woman in her 50s who looked Helena up and down with calculating eyes before naming her price. $3 a week for a small room at the back of the second floor, breakfast included. Helena negotiated it down to $2.50, knowing she needed to stretch every penny until she could find work. Her room was barely large enough for the narrow iron bed and small dresser, but it had a window overlooking the town's single street, and the sheets appeared clean, if threadbare. Helena unpacked her few belongings, changed into her other dress, which was only marginally less dusty, and headed back downstairs to ask Mrs. Patterson about employment opportunities in Keeler. "Well, you are not exactly dressed for saloon work," Mrs. Patterson said, her tone making it clear whether she approved or disapproved was anyone's guess. The mercantile might need help, though old Mr. Winters is tight with his money. There is a seamstress who takes in work, but she barely makes enough to feed herself. Your best bet might be the restaurant, such as it is. Mary Thornton runs it, and she has been looking for someone to help with the cooking and serving since her daughter ran off to San Francisco with a traveling salesman. The restaurant was 3 buildings down, a narrow establishment wedged between a saddle shop and what appeared to be a land office. The smell of frying bacon and coffee greeted Helena as she pushed through the door, and her stomach reminded her sharply that she had not eaten since dawn. A dozen mismatched tables filled the space, about half of them occupied by men in dusty work clothes and wide-brimmed hats. Mary Thornton was a plump woman with kind eyes and flour in her graying hair. She listened to Helena's request, looked her over with a practiced eye, and asked 3 questions. Could she cook? Yes. Could she handle difficult customers without losing her temper? Yes. Could she start tomorrow at 5 in the morning? Yes. $2 a day plus meals, Mary said. 6 days a week, Sundays off. I need someone reliable, Miss Crawford. This town is full of people passing through, but I need someone who will stay. I will stay, Helena promised, and meant it. She had no other choice, no other place to go, no family waiting for her anywhere in the world. She started the next morning in darkness, learning the layout of Mary's kitchen, the quirks of the wood-burning stove, the preferences of the regular customers. The work was hard and the hours long, but Helena had grown up on a ranch and was no stranger to physical labor. By the end of her first week, she had learned the rhythm of the place, which miners liked their coffee strong enough to strip paint, which cowboys preferred their eggs, and which customers to watch carefully because they had wandering hands. It was on her 9th day in Keeler that she first saw him. He came in just after the breakfast rush had ended, moving with a distinctive, uneven gait that spoke of an old injury. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with sun-darkened skin and brown hair that needed cutting. His clothes were clean but well worn, his boots scuffed but well maintained, and he wore his gun belt with the ease of someone long accustomed to its weight. But what struck Helena most was his face. It was not a handsome face in any conventional sense, too weathered and angular for that, but there was something about his eyes, a quiet intensity mixed with carefully guarded pain, that made her pause in wiping down a table. He took a seat near the window, his right leg extended slightly as he settled into the chair. Helena approached with her order pad and pencil. "Good morning. What can I get you?" He looked up at her, and for a moment something flickered in those hazel eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of something he had not expected to find in a dusty mining town. Coffee, please, and whatever Mary has left from breakfast. Bacon, eggs, biscuits with gravy, Helena said. That suit you? That suits me fine, he said, and his voice was low and rough, like he did not use it much. She brought him coffee first, thick and black and strong, and he wrapped his hands around the mug like he was drawing warmth from it, even though the morning was already heating up. When she brought his food, he thanked her quietly and ate with focused attention, not rushing but not lingering either. He walked with that pronounced limp when he left, tossing coins on the table that included a generous tip, and Helena found herself watching through the window as he made his way down the street. That is Jackson Ford, Mary said from behind her, making Helena jump slightly. He has a small spread about 5 miles north of town, runs cattle, keeps to himself mostly, good man, from what I hear, though not much of a talker. I was not asking, Helena said, but she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. Mary smiled knowingly but said nothing more. Jackson Ford came in 3 more times that week, always after the rush, always taking the same table by the window. He ordered simply, ate quietly, and left a tip each time. On his 4th visit, he looked up as Helena poured his coffee and said, "You are new in town." "About 2 weeks now," Helena confirmed. "Came in on the stage from Arizona." He nodded as if this explained something, though what it explained he did not say. "You planning to stay?" "I am planning to stay," she said. "I have work here, a room. That is more than I had in Arizona." Something in his expression shifted, softened almost imperceptibly. Keeler is not much, but it is honest work for honest people. You could do worse. "I have done worse," Helena said, and was surprised at her own honesty. Over the following weeks, Jackson Ford became a regular fixture at the restaurant, coming in 3 or 4 times a week, always polite, always quiet, always leaving that uneven gait behind as he walked out the door. Helena learned to anticipate his order, to have his coffee ready when he settled into his usual chair, to give him space when he seemed particularly withdrawn, and to offer a word or two when he seemed inclined to conversation. She never asked about the limp, not once. She noticed it, of course, how could she not, but she never mentioned it, never stared, never offered sympathy or curiosity. It was his business, his story, and Helena had enough painful stories of her own to know that some things were not meant to be shared until the time was right, if ever. She did not know that this silence, this acceptance without question, was slowly breaking down walls Jackson Ford had built around himself for the better part of 6 years. It was early November when the weather turned cold, desert nights dropping to near freezing and mornings crisp with frost. Helena had been in Keeler for just over 2 months, and she had settled into a routine that felt almost like belonging. She knew the regulars by name now, knew which table old Pete Summers preferred, knew that the Morrison brothers always split one meal between them because they were saving to bring their mother out from Ohio, knew that Doc Wheeler liked his bacon burned almost to char. Jackson Ford came in on a Saturday morning when the restaurant was unusually crowded and the only available seat was at the counter. He hesitated, clearly preferring his usual table with its relative privacy, but eventually settled onto a stool with careful movements that suggested his leg was bothering him more than usual. Helena was rushing between tables, taking orders, delivering food, refilling coffee cups in an endless cycle. She paused long enough to pour Jackson's coffee and take his order, then was pulled away by a table of minors demanding more biscuits and gravy. When she finally brought his plate 10 minutes later, her hair was escaping its pins and she was flushed from the heat of the kitchen. "Sorry for the wait," she said, setting the plate in front of him. "It is chaos this morning." "I can see that," he said, and there was the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. "You look like you could use about 3 more of yourself." "Or better yet, fewer customers," Helena said, then immediately looked horrified. "I did not mean that. Mary would kill me for saying that." "I will not tell her," Jackson said solemnly, but his eyes held that glimmer of humor. "Your secret is safe." Something passed between them in that moment, something small but significant, a shared understanding that felt like the beginning of something Helena could not quite name. She smiled at him, a real smile, not the professional one she wore for difficult customers, and then was called away to deal with the spilled coffee and a complaint about cold eggs. When the rush finally subsided and the restaurant emptied out, Jackson was still there, his plate long since cleaned, nursing his third cup of coffee. Helena approached with the pot to offer a refill. "You do not have to stay and keep the place occupied," she said. "The rush is over." "I know," he said. "I was wondering if you might sit for a minute, if you have the time." Helena glanced at Mary, who was in the kitchen, then poured herself a cup of coffee and took the stool beside him. Her feet were aching and her back was sore, and it felt like heaven to sit down. "How are you liking Keeler?" Jackson asked. "It is growing on me," Helena admitted. "It is not much to look at, but the people are decent, present company included." "That is high praise, he said. "Most people find me tolerable at best." "Most people are foolish then," Helena said, surprising herself again with her directness. Jackson looked at her for a long moment, and Helena had the sense he was deciding something, weighing options in his mind. Finally, he said, "I was wondering if you might like to see the ranch sometime. It is not much, just a small operation, but I have a good piece of land and the views are fine when you get up into the higher pastures." Helena's heart did something complicated in her chest. "I would like that," she said. "I have Sundays off." "Tomorrow, then?" Jackson asked. "I could pick you up at the boarding house around 10. We would be back before dark." "Tomorrow," Helena agreed, and the smile he gave her was worth every blister on her feet and every ache in her shoulders. Mary appeared from the kitchen just then, saw them sitting together, and her expression clearly said she had opinions but was keeping them to herself for the moment. Helena stood quickly, smoothing her apron. "I should get back to work." "Tomorrow," Jackson said again, standing as well, and Helena nodded. She watched him leave, that uneven gait carrying him out into the afternoon sunlight, and realized her hands were trembling slightly. It had been so long since she had felt anything like anticipation, like hope, like the possibility of something good. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the boarding house, Helena tried on her 2 dresses and despaired at how worn they both looked. She mended a tear in the seam of the better one, brushed it as clean as she could manage, and laid it out for the morning. Sleep was a long time coming, her mind racing with questions and possibilities and the memory of Jackson Ford's careful smile. He arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, driving a wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He had cleaned up, shaved, put on what was clearly his best shirt, and Helena felt her face flush with pleasure at the effort he had made. She climbed up onto the wagon seat beside him, and they headed north out of town into the desert landscape that surrounded Keeler. For the first mile, they rode in comfortable silence, the horses setting an easy pace, and the morning sun warming away the night's chill. Then Jackson began to talk, pointing out landmarks, telling her about the land, the difficulties of raising cattle in such harsh country, the spring that fed his property and made it viable where other spreads had failed. His ranch, when they reached it, was modest but well-maintained. A small house with a covered porch, a barn that had been recently repaired, corrals with good strong fencing, and beyond it all the dramatic rise of the mountains against the impossibly blue sky. It was beautiful in a stark, uncompromising way, and Helena felt something settle in her chest at the sight of it. "It is not much," Jackson said, and she could hear the uncertainty in his voice, as if her opinion mattered deeply to him. "It is wonderful," Helena said honestly. "You have built something real here." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and warm on her waist, and for a moment they stood close enough that Helena could see the faint scar along his jawline, could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let me show you around." He walked her through the property, showing her the house with its simple furniture and surprisingly well-stocked shelves, the barn with its 3 horses and various tack, the chicken coop that provided him with eggs and the occasional roasted bird. His cattle were grazing in the higher pastures, he explained, about 40 head. Not a large herd, but enough to provide a decent living if the market stayed stable. They sat on the porch and ate the lunch he had packed, bread and cheese and apples, and talked about everything and nothing. Helena told him about growing up on her father's ranch, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about the drought that had destroyed their livelihood and the bank that had shown no mercy. Jackson listened with focused attention, asking questions that showed he understood the pain of loss and displacement. "What about you?" Helena finally asked. "How did you end up here?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment, staring out at his land. "I came here 6 years ago," he said finally. "I needed a place to start over, somewhere nobody knew me or cared about who I used to be. I worked for other ranchers for 3 years, saved every penny, and then bought this place from an old-timer who wanted to retire to San Francisco. It is not much, but it is mine." It was not the whole story, Helena knew. There were gaps, carefully avoided topics, shadows in his eyes when he spoke of the past. But she did not push, did not ask the questions that hovered on her lips. If he wanted to tell her more, he would. If not, that was his right. "It is a good place," she said instead. "You should be proud of what you have built." "I am trying to be," Jackson said, and the honesty in his voice made her chest ache. They stayed until late afternoon, talking easily now. The initial awkwardness burned away by sunlight and conversation. Jackson showed her the higher pasture where his cattle grazed, and they stood together looking out over the vast expanse of desert and mountain, and Helena felt something shift inside her, something she had thought broken beyond repair. On the ride back to town, Jackson said, "I would like to do this again, if you would like to, I mean." "I would like to very much," Helena said, and his smile was like sunrise. Over the following week, Sunday became the day Helena lived for. Jackson would pick her up at the boarding house, and they would spend the day at his ranch, sometimes working side by side on various projects, sometimes just talking for hours on his porch, sometimes riding out to explore the surrounding country. He was teaching her the land, she realized, sharing his knowledge of water sources and safe trails and the habits of desert wildlife. The people of Keeler noticed, of course. Small towns always noticed. Mary Thornton smiled knowingly every time Jackson came into the restaurant. Mrs. Patterson made pointed comments about respectable behavior and proper courting. The other regulars watched with varying degrees of interest and approval, but no one said anything unkind because Jackson Ford was respected in Keeler, and Helena had proven herself a hard worker and a decent person. If they were growing close, if everyone could see the way they looked at each other, well, that was their business and no one else's. Helena never asked about the limp. She saw it every time he walked. Noticed when cold weather made it worse, observed how he favored his right leg when he was tired. But she never mentioned it, never offered sympathy, never treated him like he was damaged or broken. She simply accepted it as part of who he was, no more remarkable than the color of his eyes or the way his hair fell across his forehead. Jackson noticed. How could he not? Every other person who had come into his life since the injury had either stared with obvious curiosity, offered unwanted sympathy, or asked intrusive questions. But Helena simply saw him, all of him, and asked nothing. It made him love her more than he had words to express. December brought colder weather and shorter days. The restaurant stayed busy as miners and ranchers sought hot food and warm coffee. Helena worked long hours, her hands rough from washing dishes and her feet perpetually sore, but she was saving money now, adding to the small stash hidden in her room, dreaming of possibilities she had not allowed herself to consider in months. On a Sunday in mid-December, Jackson picked her up as usual, but instead of heading directly to the ranch, he drove into town and stopped in front of the general store. "I need to pick up some supplies," he said. "Would you help me? I value your opinion." Inside, he led her to a corner where bolts of fabric were displayed. "I was thinking," he said, not quite meeting her eyes, "that you might like some new dresses, for Christmas, I mean, if you would accept them. I know it is not proper for a man to buy a woman clothing unless they are engaged or married, but I thought, that is, I hoped you might make an exception." Helena stared at the fabric, beautiful colors and patterns she could never afford on her wages. and felt tears prick her eyes. "Jackson, I cannot accept something so expensive." "You can," he said firmly. "You work harder than anyone I know, and you deserve something nice. Please, Helena, let me do this for you." She looked at him, at the earnest hope in his face, and could not refuse. "Only if you let me make you new shirts," she said. "A fair trade." "A fair trade," he agreed, and his smile was brilliant. They spent an hour selecting fabric, 3 different patterns for dresses and sturdy cotton for shirts. The store owner, Mr. Winters, wrapped everything carefully and added it to Jackson's account without comment, though his eyes were sharp with interest. Back at the ranch, Jackson built a fire in the wood stove, while Helena made coffee with the supplies he kept in his kitchen. They sat together on the porch, despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun set behind the mountains in a blaze of orange and gold. "I want to tell you something," Jackson said finally, his voice quiet. "About my leg." "You do not have to," Helena said immediately. "It is your story to tell or not tell." "I know," he said, "but I want you to know. I want you to know everything." Helena waited, giving him space, giving him time. "I was in the Army," Jackson began, staring out at the darkening landscape. "Cavalry, stationed in New Mexico. 6 years ago, we were chasing a group of outlaws who had robbed a stage and killed the driver and a passenger. We tracked them into rough country, and I was riding point when my horse stepped in a hole. We went down hard, and the horse fell on my leg, crushed it from knee to ankle." Helena reached out and took his hand, saying nothing, just offering her presence. "The regimental surgeon did what he could," Jackson continued. "For a while they thought they would have to amputate, but infection set in and somehow I survived it. Took 6 months before I could walk again, and even then I knew I would never be the same. The Army discharged me with a small pension and their thanks for my service, and I left New Mexico and never looked back." "You came here," Helena said softly. "I came here," he confirmed. "I wanted somewhere nobody knew me as the soldier who had been broken. I wanted to build something of my own, to prove I was still worth something despite the limp." "You are worth everything," Helena said fiercely. "Anyone who cannot see that is a fool." Jackson looked at her then, really looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. "You never asked," he said. "Not once. You never stared, never pitied me, never treated me like I was less than whole." "You are whole," Helena said. "You are one of the most complete people I have ever met. An old injury does not change that." "I love you," Jackson said, the words tumbling out like he had been holding them back for too long. "I know it is too soon. I know we have only known each other for a few months, but I love you, Helena Crawford, and I cannot keep pretending I do not." Helena felt tears spill down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have loved you for weeks, maybe from the first time you came into the restaurant. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you have built a life from nothing. I love everything about you, Jackson Ford." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. The kiss tasted of coffee and hope, and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Jackson pressed his forehead to hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know I should court you properly for a year or more, but life is short and uncertain, and I do not want to waste another day without you. Marry me, Helena." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Jackson, I will marry you." They sat together on the porch as darkness fell completely, making plans and dreaming dreams, and when Jackson finally drove her back to town, they stopped outside the boarding house and kissed again, long and deep and full of promise. "I will talk to the Reverend tomorrow," Jackson said. "We can be married before Christmas if that suits you." "That suits me perfectly," Helena said, and reluctantly climbed down from the wagon. She floated up to her room, her heart so full it felt like it might burst, and lay awake most of the night planning and hoping and marveling at how completely her life had changed in just a few months. The next day at the restaurant, Helena could barely contain her happiness. Mary took one look at her face and smiled. "He asked you, did he not?" "He asked me," Helena confirmed, unable to stop grinning. "We are getting married before Christmas." Mary hugged her tightly. "I am so happy for you, girl. Jackson Ford is a good man, and you deserve every bit of happiness you can find." News spread through Keeler with the speed of wildfire. By the end of the day, everyone knew that Jackson Ford and Helena Crawford were engaged. The general reaction was positive, though Mrs. Patterson sniffed and said it was rather fast, was it not? But then young people today had no patience for proper courtship. Jackson came in for dinner that evening, and Helena met him at the door with a kiss that made several customers whistle and applaud. He laughed, a sound she had rarely heard from him, and she realized she wanted to spend the rest of her life making him laugh like that. They were married on December 23rd, 1883, in Keeler's small church. Helena wore a new dress made from the fabric Jackson had bought her, soft blue cotton with small white flowers. She had stayed up late for several nights finishing it, her fingers cramping from the fine stitching, but the result was worth it. She felt beautiful for the first time in longer than she could remember. Jackson wore a new suit, clearly purchased specially for the occasion, and when Helena walked down the short aisle on Mary Thornton's arm, the look on his face made her want to cry with joy. The ceremony was simple, the Reverend keeping his words brief, and when Jackson kissed her as his wife, Helena felt like she had finally come home. The small reception afterward was held at the restaurant, Mary having closed it for the afternoon and prepared a feast with help from several of the town's women. There was roasted beef and fresh bread, potatoes and gravy, pies and cakes and coffee. Nearly the whole town turned out, miners and ranchers and shopkeepers, all of them wanting to wish the couple well. Old Pete Summers gave them a hand-embroidered tablecloth his late wife had made. The Morrison brothers presented them with a framed photograph they had commissioned in secret. Doc Wheeler contributed a medical kit for the ranch, practical and thoughtful. Even Mrs. Patterson unbent enough to give them a set of good sheets, saying every proper household needed quality linens. As evening fell, Jackson and Helena said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon for the drive to the ranch. Helena had already moved her few belongings out of the boarding house that morning, everything she owned fitting into 2 bags. It was not much to start a marriage with, but it was enough. The ranch house felt different that night, warmer somehow, more alive. Jackson carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the main room. He had spent the previous week cleaning and preparing, adding touches he hoped she would like. Fresh curtains in the bedroom, a new quilt on the bed, wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table even though it was winter, and he had ridden miles to find them. "Welcome home," he said softly. "Home," Helena repeated, and the word felt like a prayer. Their wedding night was tender and careful, Jackson so afraid of hurting her that Helena finally had to pull him close and whisper that she was not made of glass. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Helena traced the scars on his leg with gentle fingers, learning the geography of his past pain, offering silent acceptance of all he had endured. "I never thought I would have this," Jackson murmured against her hair. "A wife, a home that felt complete, someone who loves me not despite my flaws but including them." "You never asked for much from life, did you?" Helena said. "I learned not to," he admitted. "Wanting things only made it hurt worse when they did not come true." "Want things now," Helena said fiercely. "Want everything. Want a full life and children and years of happiness. Want it all, Jackson, because I want it too, and we are going to make it happen together." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and they made love again, slower this time, learning each other's bodies and hearts with careful attention. The winter passed in a blur of domestic happiness. Helena learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping Jackson with the daily work of caring for livestock, mending fences, hauling water. She cooked meals on the wood stove, learning its quirks and temperatures. She sewed curtains and mended clothes and turned the small house into a true home. Jackson watched her with constant wonder, unable to quite believe his luck. Every morning he woke up next to her, and every morning he had to remind himself this was real, she was real, this life was actually his. They worked hard, both of them, but they also made time for joy. Jackson taught Helena to ride better, and they would spend Sunday afternoons exploring the higher country, picnicking beside mountain streams and talking for hours. Helena taught Jackson to dance, though he protested his leg made him clumsy, and they would waltz around the main room to music only they could hear. In February, Helena realized she was pregnant. She waited a few days to be sure, then told Jackson one evening over dinner. He stared at her, fork halfway to his mouth, and then dropped the utensils entirely and pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," Helena confirmed, and they both laughed and cried and held each other like they could keep the whole world at bay through sheer force of love. The pregnancy was not easy. Helena was sick most mornings for the first few months, and Jackson fretted constantly, bringing her cool water and soda crackers, rubbing her back when she was ill, worrying himself into knots every time she looked pale. She finally had to sit him down and explain that while she appreciated his concern, she needed him to trust that her body knew what it was doing. "I am not fragile," she said firmly. "I am growing a human being, which is hard work, but it is what women have done since the beginning of time. I need you to support me, not treat me like I might break at any moment." Jackson tried, though she could see it cost him to step back and let her do things she was perfectly capable of doing. But he learned slowly to find the balance between care and control, between concern and smothering. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves were born, filling the higher pastures with their awkward energy. The desert bloomed with unexpected wildflowers after a wet winter. Helena's pregnancy began to show, her belly rounding gently beneath her dresses, and Jackson found himself constantly reaching out to rest his hand there, marveling at the life growing inside his wife. They made a trip to Keeler in April so Helena could see Doc Wheeler. The doctor examined her carefully, pronounced both mother and baby healthy, and predicted a late September or early October birth. "First babies tend to take their time," he said. "Do not be surprised if you go past your expected date." They stopped at the restaurant to see Mary, who hugged Helena tightly and scolded her for not visiting more often. "You are glowing," Mary said. Marriage and motherhood agree with you." "They do," Helena admitted. "I never knew I could be this happy, Mary. I never knew life could feel this right." "You deserve it, both of you," Mary said. "Jackson Ford needed someone like you, someone who saw past the surface to the man underneath, and you needed someone who would value you the way he does." Summer was hot and difficult. Helena's pregnancy made the heat almost unbearable, and there were days when she could do little but sit in the shade and sip cool water. Jackson took over most of the physical work, refusing to let her do anything too strenuous, and Helena was too uncomfortable to argue much. They spent the long evenings on the porch, Jackson reading aloud from books they borrowed from the small lending library in Keeler, Helena knitting tiny clothes with yarn she had ordered from San Francisco. They talked about names, though they could not agree. Jackson liked traditional names, strong and solid. Helena wanted something a bit more unusual, something with meaning. In August, Jackson hired a hand to help with the ranch work, a young man named Tom who had just arrived from Texas and needed employment. With Tom handling the daily chores, Jackson was free to focus on preparing for the baby. He built a cradle from oak, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, carving small decorations into the headboard. He added a room onto the house, framing it out and finishing it in just under 3 weeks, creating a nursery for their child. Helena watched him work with hands on her enormous belly, feeling their baby kick and turn, and thought she might die from the sheer weight of her love for this man. The baby came on October 2nd after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Doc Wheeler came out to the ranch, having been alerted by Tom, who had ridden hard into town when Helena's pain started. Jackson stayed by her side through all of it, letting her squeeze his hands until he lost feeling in his fingers, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement when she was certain she could not go on. And then, just as dawn was breaking over the mountains, their son came into the world, with a furious wail that announced his displeasure at the whole proceeding. Doc Wheeler cleaned him and wrapped him and placed him in Helena's arms, and she looked down at the tiny red face and felt her heart expand to dimensions she had not known were possible. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He is perfect," Jackson agreed, his voice rough with tears, and touched one finger gently to their son's downy head. They named him James, after Jackson's father, who had died when Jackson was young, and gave him the middle name Crawford to honor Helena's family. Little James was a healthy baby, strong, lunged, and hungry, and he kept his parents up for most of the first few weeks with his demands for food and attention. Helena recovered slowly from the birth, and Jackson took over most of the baby care when he was not working, changing diapers and walking the floor with James when he was fussy, singing to him in a low, off-key voice that somehow always soothed the baby into sleep. "You are a natural father," Helena told him one evening, watching as he gently rocked their son. "I never thought I would be a father at all," Jackson said. "I never thought anyone would want to marry someone like me, someone broken and limping through life." "You are not broken," Helena said, as she had said so many times before. "You are exactly who you are supposed to be, and you are exactly who I need." Winter came again, and the ranch settled into a peaceful routine. James grew quickly, putting on weight and starting to smile and coo at his parents. Jackson's small herd of cattle had grown. The ranch was turning a modest profit, and they had even managed to save a bit of money for future needs. On Christmas morning, they woke to find a light dusting of snow on the ground, rare in Keeler. Jackson built up the fire while Helena nursed James, and then they exchanged simple gifts. Helena had made Jackson a new coat, lined with wool for warmth. Jackson had bought Helena a locket, silver and delicate, with a tiny photograph of the three of them inside. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had," Jackson said, watching Helena hold their son in the firelight. "This is everything I never knew I needed." "This is just the beginning," Helena promised. "We have years and years ahead of us, Jackson. Years of Christmases and birthdays and ordinary days that are extraordinary because we are together." The years that followed proved her right. They were not easy years, because ranch life never was, but they were good years filled with hard work and simple joys. James grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. In the spring of 1886, Helena gave birth to their second son, whom they named Henry, after Helena's father. 2 years later came Sarah, a daughter with dark curls and a will of iron. The ranch grew as well. Jackson expanded his herd, bought more land, hired another hand to help with the increased work. Helena started a small garden that provided vegetables through summer and fall, and she learned to can and preserve enough food to last through the winters. She also took up sewing for other families in the area, making clothes and quilts that were known for their quality and durability. Keeler changed around them. The mining boomed and then busted, but the town survived, adapting and evolving. The restaurant changed hands when Mary Thornton finally retired, though Helena and Jackson still visited regularly to catch up on news and see old friends. New families moved in, children filled the small schoolhouse, and the church added a bell tower. Through it all, Jackson and Helena built their life together with patience and love. There were hard times, certainly, droughts that threatened their livelihood, illnesses that scared them, arguments that had to be worked through with honest conversation. But the foundation they had built in those early months, the foundation of acceptance and trust and unwavering support, held firm through every storm. Jackson's leg never got better. the limp a constant reminder of his past, but it also got no worse. He learned to manage the pain on bad days, and Helena learned to recognize when he needed rest even when he would not admit it. She never asked, never made a fuss, just quietly adjusted their plans or took on extra work herself, and Jackson loved her more with each passing year for that quiet understanding. On their 10th anniversary, Jackson took Helena back to the spot where they had first looked out over his land together. That first Sunday he had brought her to the ranch. They stood side by side, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, and Helena leaned into his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" Jackson asked. "Marrying a limping cowboy with more scars than sense?" "Never," Helena said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Jackson Ford. You and our children and this life we have built. I would not change a single thing." "Not even the hard parts?" he asked. "Especially not the hard parts," she said. "The hard parts made us stronger. The hard parts taught us what we were capable of. The hard parts proved that our love was real and lasting and worth fighting for." Jackson pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "You never asked," he said softly. "That first day in the restaurant, you never asked why I limped. You never asked through all those weeks when we were getting to know each other. You just accepted me as I was." "There was nothing to ask about," Helena said. "You were exactly who you needed to be, limp and all. The injury was part of your story, but it was not the whole story. And I wanted to know all of you, not just the painful parts." "I loved you for that," Jackson said. "I loved you for not asking, for not pitying me, for seeing the whole man instead of the broken pieces." "You were never broken," Helena said, tilting her face up to look at him. "You were healing. There is a difference. And I was honored to be part of that healing, to help you see yourself the way I saw you." They stood together as darkness fell. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful and lasting from pain and hope and unwavering love. The years continued to pass. James grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to follow in his father's footsteps. Henry was more bookish, preferring to study rather than work cattle, and Jackson supported this with the same steadiness he brought to everything, helping his son order books and eventually arranging for him to attend a school in San Francisco. Sarah was as stubborn as both her parents combined, and by the time she was 12, she could ride and rope as well as any boy in the county. In 1895, when Helena was 34 and Jackson was 40, they welcomed their fourth and final child, a daughter they named Grace. She was a surprise, unexpected, but deeply welcome, and she brought new energy into the household. James was 12 by then, Henry 10, and Sarah 7, and all three of them doted on their baby sister with fierce protectiveness. Jackson, watching Helena with their infant daughter, marveled at how she had only grown more beautiful with time and experience. There were lines around her eyes now, and silver threads in her dark hair, but to him she was as lovely as the day she had stepped off that stagecoach in Keeler, dusty and determined and looking for a new start. "What are you staring at?" Helena asked, catching his gaze. "My wife," Jackson said simply. "The woman who changed my life. The woman who saw me when I thought I was invisible." "You were never invisible," Helena said. "You were always right there, solid and real, and exactly what I needed. I just had to be smart enough to recognize it." They had become pillars of the community by then. Jackson served on the town council, helping to make decisions about water rights and land use. Helena taught sewing classes for young women and helped organize charity drives for families in need. Their home was known as a place where people were always welcome, where a meal and a bed were available for anyone who needed them. The ranch prospered. Jackson's herd was one of the largest in the area, and his cattle brought good prices at market. He had 4 regular hands now, men he trusted and treated fairly, and the ranch ran smoothly even when he took time away to focus on his family. But it was the quiet moments Jackson treasured most. Evening on the porch with Helena, watching their children play in the yard. Sunday dinners around the big table he had built, all of them together and talking and laughing. Lying in bed at night with Helena curled against him, her breathing slow and steady, and feeling more grateful than he had words to express. When James turned 18 in 1901, Jackson officially made him a partner in the ranch. The boy had earned it through years of hard work and smart decisions, and Jackson wanted to ensure his son knew he was valued and trusted. They held a small celebration, just family and close friends, and Jackson gave a short speech about legacy and family and the importance of building something that would last beyond any one lifetime. "This ranch is not just land and cattle," Jackson said, his arm around Helena's waist. "It is all the love and work and hope that we have poured into it. It is the life your mother and I built together from almost nothing. It is proof that the past does not have to define the future, that scars and limps and difficult histories do not have to stop you from creating something beautiful." Helena looked up at him with tears in her eyes, and he knew she understood what he was really saying, that he had come to Keeler broken and alone, that she had found him there and loved him back to wholeness, that together they had created something neither of them could have built alone. Henry went off to university in San Francisco in 1903, studying medicine with plans to become a doctor. Jackson and Helena took the train to visit him twice a year, marveling at the city and its noise and chaos, and always grateful to return to the quiet of Keeler and their ranch. Sarah, true to her independent nature, announced at 16 that she wanted to study veterinary medicine. It was almost unheard of for a woman, but Jackson and Helena supported her dream and eventually found a program in Colorado that would accept female students. She left in 1904, promising to write every week, and kept that promise faithfully. Grace grew up with more attention than any of her siblings, the baby of the family and spoiled by everyone. But she was a sweet child, gentle and thoughtful, with a gift for music that surprised them all. Jackson bought her a piano when she was 8, having it shipped from San Francisco at considerable expense, and the ranch house was often filled with the sound of her practicing. Through all of it, through the changes and challenges and ordinary miracles of daily life, Jackson and Helena remained the steady center. They had their arguments, certainly, but they always worked through them with honesty and respect. They had their private sorrows too, including 2 miscarriages in the years between Sarah and Grace, but they supported each other through the grief and came out stronger on the other side. In 1908, as they approached their 25th anniversary, Jackson began planning a surprise. He wanted to do something special, something that would show Helena how much she meant to him, how grateful he was for every year they had shared. With the help of James and the ranch hands, he added a new addition to the house, a sunroom with big windows looking out over the mountains, filled with comfortable furniture and shelves for books. When he showed it to her on their anniversary morning, Helena cried. "It is too much," she said. "It is not nearly enough," Jackson countered. "You deserve a palace, and all I can give you is a sunroom. But maybe it is a place where you can sit and read and look at the land we have built our life on and remember that you are loved beyond measure." They held a party that evening, inviting what felt like half the county. The house and yard were filled with people, multiple generations now, some of whom had not even been born when Jackson and Helena first married. There was food and music and dancing, and Jackson, who had never been comfortable in crowds, found himself enjoying every moment because Helena was glowing with happiness. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left, Jackson and Helena stood together on the porch of the house they had built and remade over 25 years. Their children were inside, James with his wife and 2 young sons, Henry home from San Francisco for the occasion, Sarah having made the trip from Colorado, and Grace playing piano for anyone who would listen. 25 years, Helena said softly. A quarter of a century. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you first walked into Mary's restaurant, and sometimes it feels like you have been in my life forever. I wish it had been forever, Jackson said. I wish I had known you from the beginning, that we had never had to spend even a day without each other. But we would not have appreciated it the same way, Helena said wisely. We both needed to go through what we went through to become the people who could love each other the way we do. The pain and loss made us ready for each other. Jackson thought about this, about the years in the Army and his injury and the slow, painful recovery, about working for other ranchers and saving every penny and building this place from almost nothing, about walking into that restaurant with his limp and his scars and his carefully guarded heart, and finding the woman who would teach him how to be whole again. "You never asked," he said, as he had said so many times over the years. "You never asked why I limped, and I loved you for it." "I knew why you limped," Helena said, surprising him. "Well, not the details maybe, but I knew it was an old injury, probably military given your age and the way you carried yourself. But it did not matter to me why. What mattered was who you were despite it, or maybe because of it. You had been hurt and you had survived, and you had built a good life anyway. That told me everything I needed to know about your character." Jackson stared at her, processing this. "All these years you knew?" "I knew enough," Helena said with a small smile. "I knew that it was part of your story, but not the whole story. I knew that you would tell me if and when you wanted to, and I knew that I loved you regardless, that the limp was no more important than the color of your eyes or the way you took your coffee." "I have loved you for 25 years, Jackson said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will love you for 25 more, for 50 more, for however long we have on this earth together. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Helena Ford. You are my heart and my home and my reason for everything." "And you are mine," Helena said simply, and they kissed there on the porch, surrounded by the sounds of their family and the land they loved, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last forever. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Jackson was in his 50s now, and while he was still strong and capable, he tired more easily and was content to let James take on more of the ranch's daily operations. He and Helena spent more time together, taking long rides into the high country, sitting for hours in the sunroom he had built for her, simply enjoying each other's company without the constant press of work and responsibility. Henry finished his medical training and returned to Keeler in 1910, opening a practice that served the town and surrounding ranches. Jackson and Helena were immensely proud, watching their son carry on the tradition of service and care that had always been important to their family. Sarah completed her veterinary studies and also came home, becoming the only female veterinarian in the territory and earning respect through her skill and dedication. She had a way with animals that reminded Jackson of Helena's way with people, a quiet understanding that transcended words. Grace grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's kindness and her father's steady strength. She taught music lessons to children in Keeler and played piano at the church every Sunday, and showed no signs of wanting to leave the small town where she had grown up. In 1912, James and his wife had their third child, a daughter they named Helena after her grandmother. Jackson held his tiny granddaughter and felt the circle of life turning, felt the weight of years and love and continuity. This was what he had built, not just a ranch and a herd of cattle, but a family that would continue long after he was gone, a legacy of love and strength, and the courage to start over when everything seemed lost. "What are you thinking?" Helena asked, watching him with their granddaughter. "I am thinking about that day I walked into Mary's restaurant," Jackson said. "I was just looking for breakfast, and I found my entire future. I found you." "I found you too," Helena said, "and I have never regretted a single moment of it." They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1913 with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them and their children. Jackson was 55 now, his hair more gray than brown, his limp perhaps a bit more pronounced than it had been in his youth, but still the familiar rhythm that Helena had fallen asleep listening to for 3 decades. Helena was 48, still strong and vital, her hair silver now, but her eyes as bright as they had been the day she stepped off that stagecoach in Keeler. 30 years, Jackson said, raising his glass. 30 years of marriage, of partnership, of love that has sustained me through everything. I would not change a single day, even the hard ones, because they were all days with you. 30 more, Helena said, clinking her glass against his. 30 more years together if we are lucky. 30 more years of this beautiful life we have built. They could not have 30 more, as it turned out. Life, as it so often does, had other plans. But they had 12 more years together, 12 more years of laughter and love, of watching their children and grandchildren grow, of sitting together in the sunroom and talking for hours about everything and nothing. Jackson died in the spring of 1925, at the age of 67, peacefully in his sleep with Helena beside him. He had been working in the barn the day before, still insisting on doing his share despite his age, and had come in for dinner tired but content. They had sat together on the porch as the sun set, holding hands and watching the land they both loved, and he had told her once more that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. When Helena found him the next morning, gone so peacefully he might have just been deeply asleep, she did not scream or cry out. She simply lay down beside him, held his hand, and whispered all the things she wanted him to hear one more time. That she loved him, that he had made her happier than she had ever dreamed possible, that the day she met him had been the day her real life began. The funeral was held on a beautiful spring day, and it seemed like everyone in Keeler and the surrounding ranches came to pay their respects. Jackson Ford had been a good man, they all agreed, honest and hardworking, and devoted to his family. He had built a life of meaning and left behind a legacy that would continue for generations. Helena lived another 8 years after Jackson's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still strong and vital despite her grief. She never remarried, though she had offers. She told anyone who asked that she had already had the love of her life, and she needed no other. She spent her days working in the garden Jackson had helped her build, sitting in the sunroom he had made for her, teaching her grandchildren the stories of how their grandparents had met and fallen in love against all odds. She told them about the cowboy who limped but never let it slow him down, and the woman who never asked why because she loved him exactly as he was. Helena died in the winter of 1933, at the age of 72, with her children gathered around her. Her last words were about Jackson, about how much she had loved him, about how grateful she was for every year they had together. And as she took her last breath, she was smiling because she believed with all her heart that she was going to see him again, that wherever he was waiting for her, his eyes would light up just as they always had when she walked into a room. They buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones side by side marking the resting place of Jackson Ford and Helena Crawford Ford. Their children made sure the stones were beautiful, with inscriptions that told the story of their love. On Jackson's stone they carved, "Beloved husband and father who built a life of honor and love." On Helena's stone, "Beloved wife and mother who saw the whole man and loved him completely." The ranch continued for many years after their deaths, passed down through the family and expanded and improved with each generation. James's sons ran it for decades, and then their sons after them. The original house, the one Jackson had built and Helena had filled with love, was preserved as a family home. The sunroom still filled with books and the porch still welcoming anyone who needed a place to rest. And through all the years, the story of Jackson and Helena Ford was told and retold, becoming part of the fabric of Keeler's history. The story of the cowboy who limped and the woman who never asked why, who found each other in a dusty mining town and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The story of 2 people who had every reason to be broken by life, but instead chose to heal each other and create something beautiful from their scars. It became a story about acceptance and love, about seeing people for who they truly are, rather than the wounds they carry. A story about second chances and new beginnings and the courage it takes to trust someone with your whole heart. A story about a question that was never asked and a love that was all the stronger for that silence. And in that sunroom on the ranch, where the afternoon light still streams through the windows and illuminates the mountains beyond, you can almost feel their presence still. Jackson with his steady strength and his careful limp. Helena with her quiet wisdom and unwavering support. Two people who found each other when both had given up on ever finding happiness, who built a life and a family and a legacy that endured long after they were gone. Because that is what real love does. It endures. It survives loss and hardship and the simple passage of time. It leaves marks on the world that cannot be erased, that ripple outward through children and grandchildren and all the lives they touch. It becomes part of the story that gets told around dinner tables and on front porches, the story of how great-great-grandpa met great-great-grandma and fell in love in a time when the West was still wild and anything seemed possible. And at the heart of that story, always, is the simple truth that sometimes the greatest act of love is accepting someone exactly as they are, scars and limps and painful histories included, and choosing to build a future together despite and because of everything you have both survived. That sometimes the most powerful questions are the ones you never ask because you already know everything that matters. Jackson Ford limped for the rest of his life, but he walked tall and proud with Helena by his side. And Helena Crawford Ford never asked why he limped, because she loved the man, the whole man, not just the unmarked parts. Together they proved that broken things can heal, that painful pasts do not have to define futures, and that love, real love, sees beyond the surface to the soul underneath. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and grief and the passage of time. But it also continues in the descendants who still work the land Jackson built and Helena nurtured, in the values they passed down through generations, in the example they set of what a true partnership can be when it is built on acceptance and trust and unwavering commitment. And somewhere, if you believe in such things, Jackson and Helena are together still, young again and whole, walking hand in hand through endless golden sunsets with no pain and no limp and nothing but love between them, because that is what they earned through those years of devotion, through the life they built together from almost nothing. They earned forever, and no power in heaven or earth can take that away from them. The ranch still stands, a testament to their love and their labor. The town of Keeler has changed, grown, and shrunk and grown again, but the stories remain. The story of the cowboy and the woman, the limp and the silence, the question never asked, and the love that needed no explanation. It is a story about the Wild West, yes, but it is more than that. It is a story about what it means to truly see another person, to accept them without reservation, to build something lasting and beautiful from the raw materials of pain and hope and determination. And that story, that beautiful, heartfelt, true story of Jackson Ford and Helena Crawford Ford, will be told as long as there are people who believe in second chances and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds, as long as there are people who understand that sometimes the greatest strength is not in what we overcome, but in how we choose to love despite everything we have endured. That is their legacy. That is their gift to all who came after them. The knowledge that love can find you even in the most unlikely places, that acceptance is more powerful than curiosity, and that a life built on mutual respect and unwavering support can weather any storm and create something that endures long after the builders are gone. And so the story ends where it began, with a woman who never asked and a cowboy who loved her all the more for her silence. Two people who found each other against all odds in the wild, unforgiving beauty of the American West and built a love story for the ages.